And good morning again. Tom Hanks starred in a movie a few years ago called The Terminal. Its plot sounds so outrageous that it's hard to believe that it is based on a true story. In 1986, an Iranian man named Merhan Karimi Nasseri flew to Paris, France without his immigration card or other proper paperwork. He never should have been allowed to board the plane without the paperwork, but somehow it was overlooked. Without his papers, the French authorities could not let him into the country, but they couldn't deport him either. So they forced him to live in the airport until they figured out his situation. Nasseri seems to have liked living in the airport. For more than 15 years, he had been allowed to remain there. He ate at the food courts and read the newspapers and spoke to the airport employees. Even when offered the chance to leave and start life over in a new country, Nasseri chose to stay. The airport's doctor believes that Nasseri has become paranoid and confused by his loss of contact with the outside world. Nasseri says, "This is my dream world. I don't have any worries." Most of us would not like to be confined to an airport, or any place else for that matter, but for Nasseri, it became his home. So let's talk about freedom today. That makes sense on this Independence Day weekend, when we celebrate our freedom as a people. It is said that King George wrote in his diary on July 4th, 1776, "Nothing of importance happened today." Well, we think something of importance happened, and we are grateful that it did. Freedom. What a beautiful word. It's what our text is all about. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What a great thought to begin our day. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Is there anyone here who is weary? Worry, say, from work? Joe Weisenthal wrote an article for the August 17th, 2013 issue of Business Insider that might give us a little bit of comfort. He notes that Americans are famous for their work ethic. However, according to a study by the Federal Reserve Board of St. Louis, we are not the world leaders in hours worked per year. South Korea's booming economy necessitates a 6-day work week. In the past few years, South Koreans have averaged about 2,375 hours of work per year, as compared to the 1,700 hours of work per year in the U.S. In fact, workers in Singapore and Hong Kong also crushed the U.S. in hours worked per year. Swedish workers clocked the fewest work hours in an average year, only about 1,337. Now, before you pack your bags for Sweden, remember those cold, dark winters. Also, you don't speak the language, and you might have to start driving a Volvo. Some of you I know are weary from work. The stress of modern people has been well documented, particularly those with families. There are many families who work today full-time on the job and then working just as hard off the clock, meeting the responsibilities at home. Of course, you don't have to work outside the home to have more than enough to do. Kim Bolton tells of a workday that many moms can relate to. She looked around at the mounds of unwashed laundry and unmopped floors, and she silently dedicated herself to a day of full-time cleaning. And just as she was getting into a cleaning rhythm, her 2-year-old son called to her, "Hey, Mom, why don't you come and sit with me in the big chair?" Kim protested. She tried to explain how busy she was. She promised to sit with him later, but he continued to smile that charming smile and pat the chair next to him. Finally, Kim put down her laundry and settled into the chair with her son. The two of them snuggled for a minute or so, and then her son patted her on the leg and said, "You can go now." In a hectic day, he had insisted that she take just a moment to rest with him. He understood her busyness, but he also understood that their time together was more important to both of them. And here's what's interesting. For just a moment, Kim Bolton said her 2-year-old boy was an example of Jesus to her. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened," says Jesus, "and I will give you rest." There is a story that Hebrew families tell their children to help them understand the fourth commandment. The sweetest sound is the story of King Reuben, and it goes something like this. King Reuben was always asking questions. Where's the hottest place on earth? Where's the place that the snow falls the deepest? One day he asked his advisors, "What is the sweetest melody of all?" His wise men rubbed their chins and searched their books of wisdom, but they could not find the answer. "Why not have a contest to find the sweetest melody?" they suggested. And so the king called all the musicians of his kingdom to come to the palace. Early in the morning, they gathered under the king's window with flutes, harps, violins, horns, bells, drums, banjos, bugles, chimes, cymbals, gongs, triangles, lutes, lyres, and trumpets. Their tuning and scraping and testing awoke the king. Smiling, King Reuben jumped up, believing that today he would discover the sweetest melody in all the world. Throughout the morning, the king sat on his balcony and listened. By noon, he had listened to all the sounds imaginable that could be made by plucking, tinkling, blowing, and banging. By afternoon, the king had heard all the melodies which could be made by whistling, jingling, shaking, sawing, buzzing, and pounding. Then the advisors asked their king, "To your ears, which melody is the sweetest?" King Reuben had listened, but he could not tell which sound was the sweetest. One of his advisors suggested that he should have all the instruments played together at the same time. "A wonderful idea," said the king. All the instruments rang, bonged, blared, pealed, strummed, and whistled together. King Reuben wrinkled his face and listened with all his might. The noise was so great he couldn't think. Just at that moment, a woman dressed in her Sabbath best pushed to the front of the crowd. It was now late on Friday afternoon. "O king, I have the answer to your question," she said. The king was surprised because she didn't even have an instrument. "Why didn't you come earlier?" the king asked. The woman replied, "I had to wait until just before the setting of the sun." Sure enough, the sun was setting in the west, and the musicians were still puffing, blowing, chiming, and strumming. But again, there was so much noise the king could hardly think. He raised his hand. "Stop," he said, and all the musicians put down their instruments. Taking 2 candles and placing them on the balcony railing, the woman lit them. Just as the sun was setting, the flames of the candles glowed. She lifted her voice and prayed, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctified us by thy commandments and commanded us to kindle the Sabbath lights." Then she took her hands away from her face. "He that has ears to hear, let him hear," she said. The king raised his head. The advisors took their hands away from their ears. The people in the crowd stood still. The king was whispering, "What? What is that?" He could not hear a sound. What you hear is the sound of rest. And isn't the peace that the Sabbath brings the sweetest melody of all? Some of us are weary from work, and I hope you all find Sabbath rest here today. Others of us are weary from worry. Much of our fatigue is mental and emotional. I'm always amazed at the number of things some people find to worry about. An elderly woman at a nursing home received a visit from one of her fellow church members. "How are you feeling?" the visitor asked. "Oh," said the lady, "I'm just worried sick." "What are you worried about, dear?" her friend asked. "You look like you're in good health. They're taking care of you, aren't they?" "Yes, they're taking very good care of me." "Are you in any pain?" she asked. "No, I have never had a pain in my life." "Well, what are you worried about?" her friend asked again. The lady leaned back in her rocking chair and slowly explained her major worry. Every close friend I ever had has already died and gone on to heaven, she said. I'm afraid they're all wondering where I went. Few emotions take a toll on us like worry does. Author Stephanie Stokes Oliver, in her book Daily Cornbread, asks whether we are worriers or warriors. Chronic worriers let their anxiety and fear interfere with living their life to the fullest. They manifest their worry in physical symptoms like headaches and knotted muscles. Warriors seem unable to take control of their situation or take a positive change for themselves. Warriors, on the other hand, find healthy ways to deal with their fears. They don't automatically shut down and go into crisis mode. They trust that God will sustain them. Warriors take positive action to change a negative situation. Astronaut Jim Lovell is a warrior. In a news conference, he was asked about Apollo 13. He was in command of that spacecraft when it experienced an explosion on its way to the moon. With their oxygen almost gone, their electrical system out, their spaceship plunged toward lunar orbit. It appeared Lovell and his crew would be marooned hundreds of thousands of miles from Earth. Lovell was asked, "Were you worried?" Such an obvious question drew snickers. But then Lovell gave a surprising answer. "No, not really," he said. "You see, worry is a useless emotion. I was too busy fixing the problem to worry about it. As long as I had one card left to play, I played it." Jim Lovell is a warrior. People who allow worry to overwhelm them will often complain of fatigue. Fatigue, they'll tell you, is why they do not do anything about their situation. Now, friends, you may be tired because of your work, but more of us are tired because of what is happening in our brains than what is happening in the workplace. Negative thoughts will drain the life right out of you. It's true. We talked about this before. You come in from work, barely dragging one foot in front of the other. Someone calls inviting you to do something you really want to do, and suddenly you have more energy than you had for a long time. It's not the work, it's the worry. How we look at our lives makes an enormous difference in how we handle our lives. Are you weary from work? Are you weary from worry? Some of the worry we experience may come to us from a breakdown in integrity. Nothing will drain us like the fear of discovery. Always looking over our shoulder will not allow us to make much progress in the world. In his book, Uncle Tungsten, Dr. Oliver Sacks recalls some of his most vivid boyhood memories of growing up among an extended family of scientists and doctors. One of his more colorful relatives was Aunt Lena. Aunt Lena was a tiny woman with, as Sacks recalls, an iron will. She is a sociable woman with a great ability to listen to people and extract them from their deepest thoughts and secrets. Her great listening skills led her to collect gossip on all the most prominent citizens of the town. Aunt Lena used this sensitive knowledge to raise funds for her pet cause, Hebrew University. Each year she would call up a variety of people and promise them secrecy in exchange for a donation to the university. University officials never guessed that one of their most effective fundraisers was blackmailing their donors. I wonder if there are any of us who carry around secrets that we would pay good money to keep hidden. Now that's something I should bring up with the finance committee. Just kidding. Maybe. Nevertheless, anything that robs us of our peace, our joy, will drain our bodies as well as our souls. Are you weary this morning? Weary from work? Weary from worry? Weary from guilt or fear? Hear again the words of Jesus. Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Dr. Neil T. Anderson puts it like this. Jesus invites you to a restful walk in tandem with him, just as two oxen walk together under the same yoke. How can a yoke be restful, you ask? Because Jesus' yoke is an easy yoke. As the lead ox, Jesus walks at a steady pace. If you pace yourself with him, your burden will be easy. But if you take a passive approach to the relationship, you'll be painfully dragged along in the yoke because Jesus keeps on walking. Or if you try to race ahead or turn off in another direction, the yoke will chafe your neck and your life will be uncomfortable. The key to a restful yoke relationship with Jesus is to learn from him and open yourself to his gentleness and humility. You need to understand that this is more than just a pious attitude. The reason modern life is so draining on us has nothing to do with our work. People have always had to work. The reason we are weary is that we do not have the spiritual, mental, and emotional resources to deal with this brave new world. We need to ask Christ to share our yoke. We need to ask Christ to set us free from our negativity and to help us learn to trust him. When we're able to do that, then we'll be free at last. Even if we were imprisoned in an airport or a prisoner of war camp or in a dead-end job or whatever our outer prison might be, inside we'd be tasting the sweet taste of freedom. Because if Christ makes us free, we are free indeed. Will you please pray with me? As we give ourselves in service, dear God, help us not to ignore your admonition to receive grace, Sabbath, and rest. May we know your peace, and may we love, give, and live from that wholesome paradise available to us right now. Amen.